So welcome. This is the second recording that I've done regarding the PowerHA SystemMirror user interface. This particular one is going to be based on the 7.2.2 release, which we announced maybe a month ago. It's slated to GA in December 10th, so I've been playing with beta code. The last recording that I did was back in September 5th, and it was pertaining to the 7.2.1 release. So in this instance, I figured rather than take you through some charts and go through the individual line items and then go into the actual demo, I figured I'd just show you a one-pager telling you what some of the new features that you get with the 7.2.2 release are, and then I will go ahead and go into the user interface itself, demo the different features, and try to address any questions that you may have. So the first line item is going to be the concept of zones. You'll effectively be able to group your clusters. Now you can do that for cloud-based administration. You can do it for a prod and test dev environment type of grouping. The second line item that you'll have is the ability to define different roles. You get some pre-can ones, and then you can create custom ones and restrict the capabilities that each user may actually have that's part of that particular role. And then obviously you can define users through the interface now. That's kind of handy. You can associate those users with individual zones. You'll see some of that in just a little bit. So a user may not necessarily have visibility to all the clusters that are managed by the user interface. You can restrict what they can and can't do, and also what they can see as well. And then the big line item is the administrative controls. So phase one in the 7.2.1 release of the user interface did not give you administrative controls. It gave you a glance of the environment. It lets you parse through the logs, but it did not let you start and stop things or move resources. You can do that from this release, and I'll show you, the options that they introduced in this particular flavor. The last line item that I've got the bullet for is the activity log. So we now have the ability to monitor any activity that you perform through the user interface, any actions that you take. So I'll show you how that works. And I mentioned that there's 6 new line items, but there's only 5 bullets. The sixth one that you can see from the actual title itself of the menu that you see when you enter the user interface itself is that it's no longer PowerHA SystemMirror for AIX. It's PowerHA SystemMirror for AIX and Linux. So even though we have not formally announced, we are slated to announce this month within the next few days. So again, I've been playing with beta code where this same administrative interface would let you play around with PowerHA AIX clusters and PowerHA Linux clusters, and I've already got one of the Linux clusters defined. I won't go into too much detail. Maybe I'll do a separate recording in that particular one and kind of contrast what you get with AIX and what you get with Linux. But for this particular instance, I just wanted to highlight the new things that you get with the 7.2.2 user interface. So let's go ahead and take you right into the demo itself. All right, so getting into the actual system itself, I'm using the same node that I used for my last recording. So if you watched the last video, you'll notice that the screen where you enter the UI itself looks slightly different. It does actually have the mention of Linux. I've got some pre-can users that I cached up in my browser. So I'll go ahead and I'll log in as root, and then I'll show you what you can do with some of the other different users. So for starters, what you'll notice when you go into the user interface itself is that it looks similar to the way that it did before. You still have the dashboard approach, but you don't see the timeline and the events right from the get-go. What you see now is the zones themselves. One of the new line items that you can configure. And what I went ahead and did is I defined 4 different zones for time being. I've got my distribution set up where I have one for my beta clusters, playing with 7.2.2 code on the leftmost side. The second zone that I've got one where I have a 7.2.1 PowerHA cluster. And then I've got a separate zone managing one of my PowerHA for Linux clusters based on Rail 7.2. We support some of the other flavors of Linux as well, and also different releases. This one just happens to be 7.2. And then I've got a separate zone where I have not added any clusters yet for my SUSE clusters. So that'll be my dropping ground. What's nice from this view is that you can see if anything is critical in a warning state or in some type of maintenance mode. But you can click into the individual zones. You can also see that same type of view on the left-hand side. You don't have to have zones. So where it says unassigned clusters on the bottom left, on the left-hand side of the screen, if I didn't have any zones defined, I could manage my clusters individually like I did in the 7.2.1 release. But here I happen to have the distribution now with zones just to kind of show you the types of logical groupings that you could have with the 7.2.2 release. Um, the other video that our design team put together, which is again another little short video that gives you a quick glance as what you get with the 7.2.2 release, mentions that you can have cloud-based administration. So if you had regional clusters, you could have clusters in the east zone, in the west zone, and have the zone set up in that type of distribution. I happen to choose beta, prod, and then also distribute AIX and Linux clusters into different zones. So that's the first piece. If I wanted to go ahead and actually create new zones, I can do that from up top. You'll see that you have a few different options. You have the health summary, which is the view that we're in now. You've got the user management, role management, zone management, and then the activity log. So let's go ahead and go into the zones. When you first start up the UI, if it's a vanilla configuration, you're not going to have any in place. Very easy to come in, add a zone, give it a name, description, and then you can go ahead and associate your clusters with that zone. I've already gone ahead and done that. So what you see is I've got my different zones available. If I go to my 2.2 AIX zone, I can go ahead and edit it. And the main thing that I can do from here is just simply change the names. So if I look at my clusters, currently I've only got 3 clusters in place. I've got an Oracle cluster made up of 3 nodes. He happens to be my production one running version 7.2.1. And then I've got a 7.2.2 beta cluster. I may introduce additional ones into this particular UI. And I'm playing with a Linux cluster as well in the current form. So that was taking a quick view at the zone configuration, and you can kind of see how it brings in some value add. Next, I was going to talk a little bit about the roles and the different users. So if I go into the actual role management, you'll see that you have some pre-can roles. So you've got an HA root role, so basically full authority. You've got an HA admin role, HA operator role, and an HA monitor role. So if I simply come in and I just expand these options, you'll see obviously you've got the most authority under the HA root role, and you've got the various options that you can have, as far as access control, cluster management, the types of operations that you can perform, like cluster creation, verifying sync operations. Right now, I have no users associated with any of these particular roles. If I contrast it to the HA admin role, you can kind of see side by side, you don't have the access control. So you don't have the user management, and you can't define zones in the HA admin role. And then if I go under the HA operator, just to kind of paint the picture as far as what you get with each one, you can see, again, a little bit less as far as the available options. And under the HA monitor role, he can simply view the activity log. That's all he gets. Now, very easy to go ahead and create a custom role, and I'll do that in just a sec. And then under the system permissions, currently these are the options that you have available. Again, I'm playing with beta code, so the options that you see may swing a little bit. They may give you some more, they may take away. But those are the different capabilities that you have as of right now. If I come in and I add a custom role, maybe I want to go ahead and say, this guy's, let's make it lowercase to keep things consistent. So I'll create a Herrera admin role. Users that I choose to have restricted authority. And here, let's say I want my users to be able to have move, start, and stop resource group capability. Maybe I want them to start and stop cluster services and synchronize the cluster, see the activity log, but I don't want to give them creation roles. I don't want to allow them to verify the cluster. Maybe that one's not bad enough. So you can see how some of the pre-can roles already give you some of these things. They've been playing around with the different options that you can and can't do. So there's some value add to the custom roles. But today, I mean, this is just as, the way that you would go through. And it's actually giving you a little heads up. Hey, you already have these capabilities under the HA operator role, so you don't even need to create this role. Do you still want to do it? Sure, let's go ahead and do it. Basically, all it did is that it added a separate role. Currently, there are no users associated with any of them. If I wanted to come in and add additional users, currently I have none defined to the user interface. So one of the things to note from the user panel is if you come in here, if you add a user, it does not go ahead and do the push to the node itself. So it's going to take advantage of users that you've already created on the back end. In a future add-on, I suspect that you'll have the capability to come in, add a user from here, and go ahead and have it get pushed to the nodes automatically. I suspect that that's the actual intent. So if I come in here and let's go ahead and create a Herrera user, continue, and let's give him a name and his email address, and we'll go Hollywood style, and we'll give myself all 5s there, continue, and let's go ahead and give him maybe my role that I just created, the Herrera admin. Remember, it had the same exact capabilities as one of the existing roles, but I'll just use mine and select what zones he's going to have visibility to. So I can either select all, or I can unselect that and say, hey, maybe this particular role can only see the AIX guys. He cannot see the Linux. So submit this, and let's come in and we'll add one more user, and we'll call this guy, since I already had it created before and I went ahead and did a wipe when I played around with the newer code. And same email address and phone number. In this instance, doesn't really matter. I can leave these guys blank if I wanted to. They are looking to add in push notifications here, so if any events take place, that's the number that they would actually use to go ahead and send you those notifications. So we're just kind of laying down the groundwork. Let's say existing role, and maybe I only give him HA monitor role so he can see the activity log, and let's not give him access to any clusters, right? So I'll show you the contrast from here. So right now you see the 2 different users that I have there. The one on the left-hand side, the first Michael Herrera, it currently can only see 2 zones. The copy of that particular instance, and it could have been a completely different name, currently he has no zone visibility whatsoever. So the reason I did that is right now I'm logged in as root, so obviously I see everything. But if I come in and I log out, I can come back and I already had the users, cached up in my browser, so it remembered my passwords. So if I go in under Herrera and I log in, what you'll see is he only has visibility to 2 of the zones that were there. So if you kind of think about it in terms of your own environments, that is how you can restrict visibility from the user interface as far as what the actual individual users can actually see. Here I only have visibility to the AIX clusters, both the beta and the prod. If I log out and I come back in and I log in as my second instance, when you come in, this is the first view that you would have seen if it was a vanilla deploy and you had not discovered any of the clusters into the user interface. This is exactly what you would see. But note, when I created the user, even though I made him part of a role, or I assigned him a role, so he had certain capabilities, he has no visibility to any of the clusters or any of the zones. And from here, the only authority that he has is to view the activity log. So again, you can limit what you can and can't do, and you can see visibility-wise from the user interface. You don't have to give everybody root access anymore like you did in the 7.2.1 release. You can give them restricted access and restricted views into your environments. So again, a nice value add that you get. I'm going to back out one more time, log back in as root, and now I'll take you a little bit into the actual administrative controls. All right, so if I now come in and I start showing you the actual administrative controls, let me go ahead and happen to pick on the 722 zone, which has got a 722 cluster. So the same options I had before as far as adding clusters, removing clusters, and creating clusters, which is an actual guided wizard that would allow you to push a config out to a pair of LPARs out there. But if I come in and I expand my current view, now at the actual cluster level, I have options like stopping cluster services, stopping all the resource groups, verifying the cluster. I do not have the sync option because I don't want to do that at the actual cluster level. I can create resource groups and then I can move my cluster. And that's not the traditional CLRG move operation. That's moving a cluster from one of the created zones over to a different zone if I wanted to do it that way and not go into the actual zone administrative panel. Now, if I dive a little bit deeper and I go to the node level, if I happen to look at node A, I have the same type of options where I can stop cluster services, I can stop the resource groups, or I can perform an actual cluster synchronization. So I would want to do it at the node level because if I made changes on node A, I want to make sure that the push is done from node A to the remaining cluster members. Likewise, if I had made changes on node B, I'd want to go ahead and synchronize from node B and push the changes from my local config out to the remaining cluster members. If I expand things out even further, I had previously done some RG move operations back and forth. In the previous recording that I did back in September, I showed the operation being performed from the command line interface, and since I did not have administrative controls in the UI, I showed how quickly the UI picked up on that change, and so the operation actually taken place. Now I have the ability to execute the RG move operation from within the user interface itself. So for the RG itself, I can click on move a resource group. And again, unlike when I showed it before going via the command line, here I've got a guided panel or menu that will automatically detect, hey, I've only got one other available target. I can select my node A and I can go ahead and perform the operation and do an RG move from the user interface itself. I'm just going to go ahead and exit out just for time's sake. And from the same screen, what you can actually see is I can not only do the resource group move like I was just showing, but I can also go ahead and add a resource. So from here, I've got separate modules where I can add a service IP, add a volume group, add a journaled file system, or add an actual application controller. So just as an example, if I choose to add an additional file system, it'll go ahead and detect the VGs that I have in place. I can select whether it's enhanced, standard, compressed, or large file enabled. I can set the permissions on it, and then I can go ahead and proceed and specify the mount point. So slash, UI, FS created, whatever number, and specify some of the mount options. I won't actually kick off this operation, but I can come back in and go ahead and try to add a separate resource. Let's say I wanted to add a volume group. I can come in, select the type of volume group that I want to create, the VG name, data VG. Let's say 2 if I had existing ones, specify maximum physical partitions, maximum logical volumes, whether I need the super strict policies, and if I continue, it'll pick up on the disks that I actually want to use for that particular VG. Add it, and it'll go ahead and effectively give me a CSPOC-like operation. Now, I have noticed a couple quirks. It's missing a piece here and there. It's going to continue to get enhanced. So, I mean, this is only Rev 1. So just kind of wanted to show you the CSPOC-like capabilities that you will also get when you come into the menus. I come right back to where I was. The contrast that I wanted to show you is that I was playing with the 722 cluster in this instance, and that's where I got the actual administrative control. So you see the 3 little dots. If I instead go ahead and collapse this, and I look at my 721 production clusters, I have the same options to add and remove clusters or go through the actual config wizard like I did before in 721. But when I expand this option, I don't have the option to perform administrative actions onto the cluster members if it's anything older than HA722. I don't know if they'll retrofit the functionality to give you admin controls to 721 or anything earlier, but just as a heads up, when you get the 722 code, you'll be able to perform only the administrative functions on the 722 clusters. And you'll have the same type of functions for the Linux clusters, but we'll discuss that further when we formally announce and get you the actual product offering. Those are the biggest line items that I wanted to highlight as far as the administrative controls. The last piece that I wanted to show you is we do now also have an activity log. So anytime that I perform administrative functions, I can go ahead and view them And if I enter the actual activity log, I can see that I had performed previously an RG move operation. It was recorded. It was performed as the root user. And I've got timestamps for everything that's actually taken place. I added new users, new roles were created. So I would have the same type of functionality had I logged in as a different user. So right now I'm under the root view. If I had logged in under Herrera or under Herrera 2, I would have seen the administrative functions that I performed under that particular user. The other nice little add-on that they brought into the mix as well here is they allow you to save off that activity onto an Excel sheet. So you've got the CSV file option, you can save it off. And then if I just go ahead and I launch it and save it to my desktop, I can go ahead and minimize. And if I launch the CSV file, let's see if Excel actually comes online. What you'll see is I've got all of the different operations that have taken place. If I wanted to sort them, or if I wanted to, have some type of record saved off outside of the user interface itself. That's pretty much it as far as the new functions that came into the mix. Again, just like in the last video, feel free to go ahead and give us feedback in the comments, and look forward to some additional, recordings in intellectual capital related to our new PowerHA for Linux offering. Thanks.